French military strategist Ferdinand Foch said, "The most powerful weapon in the world is the human spirit on fire." German philosopher William Hegel wrote, "Nothing great has ever been accomplished in the history of the world without enthusiasm. Knowledge is valuable, but zeal is invaluable." Albert Einstein said, "I have no special talents. I am just passionately curious." American author William Ward said, "Enthusiasm and persistence will make an average person superior, while indifference and lethargy will make a superior person average." And Helen Keller, the blind inspirationalist, said, "Life is either a daring adventure or it is nothing." 7 motivational quotes. We just finished the first point of our sermon tonight. Now, 6 powerful verses. Join me in John, the 2nd chapter. We're going to go through a string of verses that all have in common the word or concept of fervent or zeal. And this list could be lengthened, but for sake of time, we will look at 6 verses together tonight. And then our last point will be 1 penetrating question. 7 motivational quotes, 6 powerful verses, 1 penetrating question. What we're doing in this series of lessons is trying to move the needle on our personal zeal. Sometimes the world beats us down. Sometimes the fire is in danger of going out. Sometimes we need to be revived again. And all of us would probably say that our zeal for God could go up. And so at the end of this series, I'm hoping there's not a person who's been here who will say, "My zeal is the same," or that will say, "It's gone down." But all of us will say, I'm more fired up than I've been before. I'm ready to serve my Lord." And so now let's think about John chapter 2. This is the first year of Jesus' ministry. This is the first Passover of 3 that John mentions. That's how we know how long his personal ministry was. He was baptized probably 6 months before this. John only briefly mentions it, but then he was in the wilderness for 40 days. He went up to Cana, take 5 days, then Nazareth, then down. So he's probably 6 months in. So normally if you ask a preacher how long was Jesus' personal ministry, they'll say 3.5 years. And that's based on John 2:13, John 6:4, John 11:55, those 3 Passovers. Now, John is the only author, biographer of Jesus that covers the first year of his personal ministry. They all cover his baptism, but then the synoptics jump over the first year. The wedding feast at Cana is only mentioned by John, and then this that we're about to read is only mentioned by John, the first cleansing of the temple. Now, you can imagine the excitement of his disciples. I'm setting the stage. We're going to be in John 2:13 momentarily. But you can imagine the excitement of those disciples that got picked out of the crowd that day. You come with me, and I'll take you and you. And so he picked out the 12 apostles. And they got to go with him and be in his school. It was a rabbinic school. Our schools, we come and we sit down at a desk and a teacher lectures us. But that's not the way rabbis did their school. You follow the rabbi around everywhere he went. You listened to what he said. You watched how he interacted with people. That's what they got to do for 3 years. They learned from the greatest man who ever lived how to serve and what to preach and how to honor God. So they follow him and they go to the wedding feast of Cana. That's the first thing out of the chute. And they're there and they ran out of We would say grape juice. Don't accuse Jesus of making alcohol there. What would you think of a parent that had a party for their children or even a wedding and gave them 120 gallons of alcohol? That'd be a bad parent, but it makes even a worse Savior. He didn't do that. The word oinos here, it can mean alcohol, it can mean grape juice. It's determined by the context. And to them, they couldn't go to the supermarket and buy sweet drinks. They could use honey. They didn't have granulated sugar. So the sweeter the drink, the better it was. So Jesus made for them sweet grape juice. They loved it. But not alcohol. But that's another lesson for another night. The point is that they were out of it. And his mother said, they're out. It was very embarrassing. And Jesus said, not yet. And then he said, go fill it up with water. And the servants did so, filled it up to the brim, and then take it to the governor. He said, this is the best. And the disciples over there, wow, did you see what he did? They must have been very excited. That's our teacher. And then he said, come on, we're going to Jerusalem. So they go from Cana, which is in Galilee. They go south, but they go up the mountain. Mount Zion, Jerusalem's on the mountains. They got up there. What's he going to do next? You know, this is exciting. And so he takes them into the temple. And he looks around, and I suppose, the Bible doesn't say, but I suppose he had a frown on his face because they were buying and selling right there in the temple. And he didn't like it. Now, this wasn't a flash of anger because he made a whip. Bulrushes, not leather. You know, the commentators go back and forth. Did he use this on the people or on the animals? Well, I read it again today, and it looks like he did both. But he didn't hurt them. This is the most violent thing that Jesus ever did on earth. It's not the most violent thing that was done to him, but it's the most violent thing he did. It's not the most violent thing that he will ever do. He's going to say, depart from me into that lake. That's the worst, that's the most violent thing. But we do that to ourselves. But on this occasion, let's read it beginning verse 13, John 2:13. And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves. That's 3 levels. High-end, medium, and poor people. 3 levels. The priest had to offer an oxen according to the law. Others could. Most people offered a sheep, a lamb. But if you were too poor, then you could offer a turtle dove or a pigeon. There actually were 4 kinds of sacrifices. See if I can remember them. Peace offerings, trespass offerings, burnt offerings, and guilt offerings. And there were 5 animals that they could offer. 3 of them are here, plus the heifer and the goat. I guess you could say the oxen and the heifer. And you could add the pigeon and the turtle dove. So really you got 5, whether you count the heifer as the oxen or you count the pigeon dove as the pigeon as the dove. At any rate, Jesus is watching them sell these animals. And the changers of money city. Let me comment on the changes of money first. Everybody had to offer a half shekel temple tax. It didn't matter if you were poor or rich, everybody offered the same amount, half shekel. Now, there are 2 different ideas about why you had to exchange money when you got there. Because Passover is the most popular of the Jewish feasts. Every male was required to come. Male Jew was required to come and live within 200 miles. But most of the time, whole villages would come. So it was a huge crowd. Barclay says 2 million plus. I don't know if that's exaggerated based on Josephus, but it certainly was a large crowd of people there. And if you lived 200 miles away, trying to drive a sheep all that way was not practical. In fact, he might not even make it. So what they would do, and the Old Testament allowed for this, it said you could turn your animal into money and then turn your money back into an animal wherever God placed his name. So that's what they would do. They'd sell, they'd get there, and they'd buy. Now, in the law it says you had to put up your animal and watch him for a few days to make sure there wasn't anything wrong with him before you could offer him. And so if you bought an animal when you got there, you didn't have that option. So what the priest would do was they would pre-qualify these animals before they put them in their pen. The priests are the ones selling them. And so if you brought your own, because they were crooked, you brought your own, they might just find something wrong with it. So you got to go buy one of ours. It was a racket. And then the changing of the money. There's two ideas about that. One is they wouldn't accept any coin that had an idol on it, or even a Caesar because he claimed to be a god. The other one is it was based on the content of the coin. In those days, it was uneven. So they wanted Tyrian shekels and half shekels from Tyre, out the seacoast town, because they were known to have the highest content of silver. So they would trade. They said, you got to use that. Because they were greedy and they wanted more money. At any rate, so when you got up there, there wasn't anything wrong with exchanging money, currency, or even buying an animal. That wasn't what was wrong. What was wrong was what they were charging for it, which was exorbitant prices, and where they were doing it. The temple complex faced east, and all the way, the further you went into the complex, the more exclusive it became. So coming from all the way inside out, most holy place, only the high priest could go in there, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Out from that one level, the holy place, only priest could go in, and that by cycle or assignment. Out from that, you had the laver and the altar, and beyond that was the first court, which is the court of the priest. Any priest dressed in the garb of the priest could enter there and worship. Beyond that is the temple of the men. Any male Jew could go there if he was clean. Clean in the sense of ceremonially clean according to the law. Beyond that was the court of the women. It wasn't just for women, but it was as far as a female Jew could go. So men would be there too, but that was called the court of the women. Behind the court of the women, there was a wall that was 3 cubits tall. A cubit is the length from an elbow to the longest finger, generally 18 or 21 inches. So you got 3 of those. There were 14 steps that went down to the court of the Gentiles, and there was a sign there that said, warning, Gentiles enter upon penalty of death. No Gentile could go to the court of the women. You see, it's more and more less and less exclusive the farther you go out. Now, I said all that. Well, beyond that, before I come back to the court of the Gentiles, you had Solomon's porch, 49 feet wide, 39 feet tall. The beautiful gate was between the court of the women and the court of the Gentiles. All right, so where they're selling is in the court of the Gentiles, which is a place of worship. It's as far as any Gentile could go in the temple to worship God. Now, have you been around a market? You have. Have you been around a trade day or a flea market or something? And, well, it's pretty loud. They're over here trying to haggle about, well, that's too much. How would you take this? And so you got these people standing in line waiting to exchange their coins. And then you got over here all the animals, and people are trying to buy those, and animals aren't quiet. And they don't smell so good. And they make a mess. Can you imagine trying to worship in that? Jesus comes into a place of worship. What are all these animals doing in here? What's all this business going on? That ought to be done out there in the street. It doesn't need to be in here. And so Jesus took the whip and drove the animals out. And whether or not he used it on the keepers, if their animals are leaving, where are they going? They're going to catch the animals, that's their money, right? And then he overturns the money changers' tables. Can you picture this? You got to. I'm sure they were organized, so they had all the different coins stacked up here. They had taken in from Egypt and all different places, and they got it on. Okay, where you? Okay, let's put that one here, and here's this one, and that'll be this much money. So they got, and there's different vendors. So Jesus walks in and just flips all the tables over, and all that money goes everywhere, and everybody, oh, that's mine. Can you imagine the chaos? And then there's the birds in the cages. He said, get them. You couldn't chase a bird with a whip in a cage. So he said, get them out of here. You've made my Father's house a house of merchandise. Now he's going to do this again at the end of his ministry because they came right back. They didn't repent. And so in Matthew 21 and also Mark and Luke record it, he has to do it again 3 years later. But this is the first time. There's two different times. I said all that just to get to verse 17. Now, in the meanwhile, the disciples, I see them standing over here against the wall, right? They're like, oh boy, he's going to get us arrested. Boy, I didn't see this coming. What is it? What's he doing? He's turning over the tables. Look what you see. Whew. Can you imagine being one of the disciples this day? And this is what we're going to focus on. Jesus said, verse 16, take these things hence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. Verse 17, and his disciples remembered. Now they had all grown up Jews. They went to synagogue. They had family devotionals every day. They were Jewish males. They learned large portions of the Scriptures by memory. And one of them said, you know what this reminds me of? A verse that we memorized as a kid. It's Psalm 69:9 in our Bibles. That it was written, the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. That is a messianic psalm. The other half of it, that's the second half, but the first half is quoted in Romans as messianic. So it's a messianic psalm. Now, we started right where we needed to start on zeal. Because we're all trying to put our feet in the prints that Jesus left behind. And whenever we say, oh, to be like Him, one of the things that we're saying is, I want to have the zeal of God that Jesus had. I want to be as on fire for my Father as He was for His Father, our Father together. And so Jesus set the example right off the reel in His first public act of being on fire for worship and for defending His Father's house. Now this was Passover. If you've read the Old Testament, Exodus 12 for instance, you know that on the day of Passover, the Jewish heads of family, the males, had to get all of the leaven out of the house prior to Passover because leaven represented sin. So they had to get it out. Maybe the wives would have leaven in the kitchen to make bread. We got to get that out of here. Nothing can be in the house when we're celebrating the Passover meal. Now, this is His Father's house. That means it's His house. So He's cleaning out the leaven. He's getting the sin out of His Father's house. Now, I need to be zealous for the things that Jesus is zealous for. One of them is worship. The second one is my Father's honor. And the third one is eradicating sin. All right, how do we apply this? How about that phrase, eaten me up? We still use that, but we don't use it the same way. We say so-and-so has cancer and she's just eaten up with it. Or he's just eaten up. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean it's pervasive. It's thorough. Well, that's what they meant here. Jesus is eaten up with zeal for His Father. So I might ask myself the question, and ask you to ask yourself the question. What's eating me? What's eating me? What? Now, not what we say about ourselves, because we cut ourselves some slack. But what would somebody who knows me say I'm the most zealous for? Would it be my sports team? Oh, you never see Brother Webster unless he's got an Alabama shirt on. Or up here, down here, Arkansas, or whatever. Texans, Cowboys, whatever. Nothing wrong with having a team. But if I love my team more than I love my Lord, I got my priorities upside down. And if I'm more zealous on Saturdays than I am on Sundays, then I'm wrong. I want my team to win on Saturday, but I want my Lord to be honored on Sunday more. Second verse. Acts 18:25. This is when we are introduced to a famous New Testament couple, Aquila and Priscilla. And they hear Apollos preach for the first time. This is Acts 18:25 is where I'll begin. It says there was a certain Jew named Apollos, born in Alexandria, an eloquent man, mighty in the Scriptures, came to Ephesus. He was instructed in the way of the Lord. And being fervent in spirit, he spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. You know, I guess I would have loved to have heard all the New Testament preachers. Of course, Jesus, number one. Wouldn't it have been something to be there on the day when he preached the Sermon on the Mount? Oh, wow. I'd love to have heard Paul on Mars Hill. But I would have liked to have heard Apollos preach. He knew the book, mighty in the Scriptures. He had an oratory about him. He knew how to communicate with people. And there was fire in his sermons. He was fervent in spirit. You know what we teach those preacher students? Josh, don't listen. Either put some fire in your sermon or put your sermon in the fire. It's a sin to make the gospel boring. I really believe that. It's a sin to make the gospel boring. Now, there's different styles of preaching and different personalities, and God communicates through personalities. And one style I may be attracted to and somebody else is different. I'm not getting into all that. I'm just saying if I'm not excited about the lesson I'm preaching, I ought not preach it. If I don't see that the people in the audience need to know what I know and I'm trying to teach them, then get somebody else to preach. That's the most important time all week. What goes on in this building or the building where you worship on Sunday is more important than what goes on in Washington, D.C. or Wall Street or Hollywood or FedEx Field. What goes on in here matters. And souls are on the line. So preachers, put some fire in your sermon. Don't on Saturday night say, what am I going to preach tomorrow? I better get up something. I got to go. It's too late, friend. You should have been working on that 6 days already. And you should have been praying about it. You should already have it up here by then. The world's got our kids 6 days, 14 hours a day, and we got 4 hours at the best. And they get to Bible class 5 minutes late and they have to clean up before they go leave, so you only really got 30 minutes. We better make it count. We need more preachers, and we need more good preachers. We need more preachers who have some fire in their belly for preaching the Word of God. Apollos is an example of that. Our next verse is Romans 1:15. This is a favorite of mine. This is Paul. Paul was an amazing man. He didn't become a Christian until he was probably about 38 years old. He grew up in a Jewish family. He was zealous of his religion, but he was wrong. He was probably born the same year as Jesus or close, about the same age. That would have meant that he would have been in Jerusalem on this Passover that we just read about in John 2. But we have no record that Saul ever met Jesus, though they would have been in that same 2 million people crowd. But he met the Lord on the road to Damascus. He saw him, which qualified him to be an apostle. Who art thou? These are the two most important questions you will ever ask. And everybody has to ask them sometime or another. They're his questions, but they are universal questions. Who art thou, Lord? Who is Jesus? Just a history character? Just a philosopher? Just a religious founder? Just a good man? Just a prop? No, none of that. The Son of God. Who art thou, Lord? I got to make up my mind whether I believe that or not. And my eternity hangs on the balance of how I answer that question. Unless you believe that I am He, you shall die in your sins. John 8:24. Second question was, Lord, what would thou have me to do? That's, I think, Acts 9:4, Acts 9:6. Go in the city to be told thee what thou must do. So he went in the city, he fasted for 3 days, he prayed, and the preacher came. Now, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, wash away thy sins. Call the name of the Lord. Acts 22:16. And Paul came up out of that water. Now, I'm speaking, I'm describing what I see in that verse. It doesn't say what I'm about to say. But he came up out of that water on fire for God. And he started sprinting toward heaven, and he never slowed down till they cut off his head, if tradition is right. That was 30 years later. He traveled 12,000 miles, preached on 3 continents. He established score of congregations. He baptized hundreds of people, if not thousands. He wrote more of the New Testament than anybody else by chapter, 100 chapters. His zeal never waned. Now, all that to get us to Romans 1:15. Paul said, as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you at Rome also. That's the measuring stick. As much as in me is. It's not as much as may be in you or somebody else. I'm only responsible for what opportunities and talents God gave me. But I am responsible for those. As much as in me is. You know, you could lock Paul up and he wrote the Bible and he converted his guards and he prayed. You turn him loose and he travels and preaches the gospel. You can't stop a guy like that. What can stop me? This, what I'm about to say, may be the most important thing I say tonight. So if you sort of drifted off, come back. It's not who's going to let us preach the gospel to the world. It's who's going to stop us. We don't need their permission because we got the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned. I don't want to overstate this because I'm emotional about this. We're not doing it. we haven't done it. There are people who live within a rock's throw of our buildings that have never been invited inside them. They live across town from us that we've never offered a Bible study to. That are going to go to Judgment Day from our generation on stirring the dust of this orbiting sphere at the same time we are. That say, who's Jesus? Never heard of him. As much as in me is, I'm ready to preach the gospel. What more can I do than I've done? And how many days do I have left? I mean, you can do the math. The average life is 29,000 days. Multiply your age times 365 and subtract it from 29,000, and that's what you got left. What am I going to do with those? Don't do it right now. It might depress you. It depresses me sometimes when I look at it, you know. But it might just be the Lord let me live longer if I got something to do that He wants done. And you know, is it really a bad thing for a Christian to die? You know, Paul said, I'm ready. I'm ready. The next one, Romans 12:11. Romans 12:11 is another short verse. Romans 12 is a great chapter. Paul, now before we read this, remember that business is not used in the Bible. I love to see a Bible that's like that. His Bible is stained with his handprint. You know the oil that's best for Bible covers is the oil in your hand. I love to see it. You know, a Bible that's falling apart belongs to somebody whose life is not. Romans 12:11. Business is used in the sense of the Lord's business. Jesus said, I must be about my Father's business. Same way here. Romans 12:11. Not slothful in business, but fervent in spirit. The word fervent is interesting. I'm not much of a cook. I remember one time I was going to cook spaghetti. And pretty much anybody can cook spaghetti, right? But I'm pretty absent-minded. So I've got the big pot out, filled with water, spaghetti in there, put the lid on it. But you know, it takes a while for it to get going, right? So I go in the other room, and I guess I'm working on a sermon or something. I don't remember. But I start hearing this noise. What is that? Oh, I'm cooking. So I'll go in there, and you know, it's boiling over, and that water's hitting the hot eye, and it's spattering, and that's what this word means. To boil over. Fervent in spirit. So here's my question. It's very similar to the Sunday question of the scale, for those who are here. So blue for cold, orange for lukewarm, and red for hot. Scale 1 to 10, where's my spiritual number? It's the same question, to ask a different way. Is my zeal boiling over? Or is it not boiling at all? Well, you're here on a Tuesday night, so I'm pretty sure we don't have any not boiling at alls here. And probably have almost all boiling over. But I suppose that sometimes, well, I know this is the case in somebody's life, it dies down a little bit. And I need to turn up the heat. Next verse, 2 Corinthians 9:2. I want to go real fast on these two because I need to ask our last question. 2 Corinthians 9:2 is talking to the church in Corinth, and they were in Achaia, which is the foot of Italy. Macedonia is in the north. So Paul had gone to Corinth first, and he's raising money for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And they said, yeah, we'll help. So he left there. They didn't give any money. He said, I'll get it on the way back. So he left and went to Macedonia and started talking to those churches. Berea, Philippi, Athens. And he said, Paul was a wise preacher. He played them against each other. He said, well, Corinth was poor. They were dirt poor. He says that in 2 Corinthians 8:5. And he went up there where they had more money, and he said, well, Corinth has already promised to give. You're not going to not give, are you? Well, you see how, well, of course they gave. Well, if Corinth is going to, we're not going to look back. So then he's getting ready to go back to Corinth. And some of the people from Macedonia are with him. There's a big group traveling with him. He's making sure that money is, every nickel's counted for, and there's plenty of witnesses to it. But anyway, there's a big group going, some of them from Macedonia. He sends this letter back to them. To Corinth, he says, by the way, I'm coming to get that money. Be sure you got it, because I'm going to look bad if you don't. Well, that's the first part of chapter 9, but the reason we're reading it is verse 2. In verse 2, the last part says, your zeal hath provoked very many. Because he had used their zeal to get others to give. All right, so the principle there is, we have some congregations that are dying out. Some are closing their doors, selling their buildings. Sometimes when preachers get out of preaching school, most of the time, they don't go to a big 300-member church, right? Especially if they're young, especially if they're single. So they go, where do they go? Well, they sometimes go to these small churches that are not growing. In fact, they're going the wrong way. What advice would you give a young preacher going in that situation? This is what I tell them. If you set yourself on fire, that community will come and watch you burn. You set yourself on fire, and that congregation will catch on fire. It's hard to be around somebody whose zeal is boiling over without getting it on you. There are churches that turn around. They go from 12 members to 25 members to 35 to 50 to 60 to 70. What happened? The gospel didn't lose any of its power. There's still people out there that will be touched with the gospel. They'll learn it, they'll obey it, they'll become a part of the church. Somebody's got to be zealous for it. It's hard to live in a house of somebody who loves the Lord and not love the Lord. I didn't say it's impossible, I said it's hard. It's hard to grow up in a family where mom and dad love Jesus and they're on fire for Him and grow up and hate Jesus as a child. No, it's logical to be provoked to follow in those steps. The last scripture is Titus 2:14. He hath people for His own possession. That says, the last part says, zealous of good works. I sometimes ask myself, how much is enough? And what should I? I've been in a lot of churches of Christ. I've been a member of several, but I've been in a lot. And I'm sure I haven't looked in this one. But I'm pretty sure it's the case, because everyone I've ever been in, there's a sign-up list in the foyer. You know, host the youth devotional, clean the baptistry, mow the grass, help with showers. You know, there's a million things. Have the preacher over for supper. That's a good one. There's always a lot of things to sign up for. So here's the question. And I have no idea if there's even a list out there. And I've never been in the congregations, I guess, that are otherwise represented here than this one. So it's not personal. But the question is, if I'm zealous of good works, how many of those lists would my name be on? That's a pretty practical question. Now, some of them may not have to do with me. Maybe it's for the teenagers to go somewhere and I'm not one. All right, let's ask our last question. Our third point, last question. 7 motivational quotes, 6 powerful verses, 1 penetrating question. It's found in Isaiah 6:8, where on the day that Isaiah was called to be a prophet, the Lord said, "Who will go for us? Who will go?" And don't you love Isaiah's response? "Here am I, Lord, send me. I'll go. Let me go." Who will go for the Lord in this room tonight? You know, if this lesson ends in about 3 minutes, which is when the words will stop, it was a failure. You might say, well, it kept my attention, or those are good verses, or, yeah. But if it stays in here, did it really make any difference? This lesson will only be effective if it changes our lives tomorrow and next week. If my needle is going up, if I'm making some decisions, I'm going to do more. I'm going to do better. I wrote a sermon sitting over there in that Family Dollar parking lot a minute ago. I was the first one here tonight. I'm never the first one here. But I sat over there and went through my scriptures and prayed about it. But in Matthew 26:22, the disciples asked Jesus, "Lord, is it I?" I wrote this sermon. I get to teach Matthew next fall, so I'll give it to him then. "Lord, is it I who's letting the church go down on my watch? Lord, is it I whose mouth is quiet when you need someone to speak up? Lord, is it I when my hands are clean and soft when they should be dirty and calloused? Lord, is it I who keep my money in my pocket when there's somebody that needs some help? Lord, is it I?" It says, that's what I'm talking about. My zeal shows up in my words, my worship, my activities, and my devotion. I can sing it, but I got to show it. Thank you for listening tonight. Some of you have driven a long way to be here, maybe even haven't had supper yet. And there's ice cream back there melting, and I haven't finished this sermon. So it's over. Except, there's not a person in this room who's in such a hurry to eat those calories that we would be upset if someone responded to the love and the grace of God tonight. I guarantee you there's not a person in here who would not rejoice if somebody stepped down that aisle, this aisle, or that aisle and came down to this pew or that one and said, "I believe in Jesus. I want to be baptized for remission of my sins." We've prayed that would happen in this meeting. No doubt a lot of us have. I have. If you're not a New Testament Christian tonight, please don't leave earth without being baptized to have your sins washed away. Nobody wants to go to Judgment Day unprepared. Do what Jesus said to do, Mark 16:16. If you've done that before, but you say, sin's come back in my life and I haven't been what I should have been, my example's not been what I wish it had been, and I need to start over. I want to start fresh tonight. Well, you can do that. God is God is looking down in the service tonight. I don't think I'm misspeaking when I say that. Sometimes I wonder if the angels aren't around the balcony of heaven looking into this service tonight. Because the angels are concerned about our salvation. And a decision might be made in the next 3 minutes that will reverberate into eternity. If you're subject to the invitation tonight, will you come? We'll stand as we sing.